Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to the PIDE webinar. Today we've got a very important report to launch. We've been working on this report for the last 8-9 months, maybe a little more. It's an important report because the subject of civil service compensation and the subject of public sector costs and public sector wages is all shrouded in secrecy. We have no clear idea on what the public sector spends on its service. We only have one figure, which is public sector wages, which is quite small, but there are other costs that have to be taken into account. And quite frankly, in economic theory, there is a huge amount of literature. In fact, about 5 Nobel Prize winners have been won on this, that compensation must be linked to performance, and transparently so. If there is any non-transparency, we all know from game theory that things can be gamed. And the question here that we have to see is that given a fragmented and a broken, frankly, broken compensation system, what are the kinds of games that people can play in order to be able to game the system? And we see some of that at work in real life, on the media, etc. But I will not go into any great detail here. I'll just try and introduce the people and then get on with it. We are very honored to have Nargis Sethi. Nargis Sethi is a very prominent civil servant that everybody knows about. Nargis Sethi currently is the chairperson of the Pay and Pensions Committee, but she is well known in her own regard. She's been the principal secretary to the Prime Minister. She's been the cabinet secretary. She's been secretary in many places, and she's regarded as one of the best in the civil service. She's also been the Federal Public Services Commission. So Nargis Bibi, thank you very much for coming to PIDE and helping us do this. Let me begin by asking Nargis to say a few words so that we can begin the webinar. Nargis Bibi, over to you.
Thank you, Dr. for asking me to chair this very important session. I'm looking forward to the deliberations, and I would also be making my own comments, towards the end before your Q&A session. So I look forward to the deliberations, and then I would be able to say something. Thank you so much for inviting me and asking me to be part of this webinar.
Thank you, Nargis. Obviously, your comments are the most welcome because you know the system very well. You have been cabinet secretary, which is the head of the civil service. Now we've got, our report will be presented by Dr. Nayab, but after that we will have Jamil Nasser, and a civil servant himself, but also an author of books and a very well-known writer in economics. Therefore, we'll get Jamil to comment on this. Then we've got Rauf Hassan. He is the special assistant to the Prime Minister on information. Rauf is a well-known writer in his own regard and a foreign policy analyst. So we thought we'd get Rauf to comment on this too. But let me begin with the study that we are putting forward. Dr. Durre Nayab, PIDE's Director of Research, and herself well-known author. She published the seminal research on demographic dividend in the middle class. Dr. Durre Nayab has been leading this project, so let her present the results. Dr. Nayab, over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Nadeem. Let me share the presentation.
There's no volume. We can't hear you.
Because I haven't started speaking yet. Okay.
Yeah.
So is the presentation visible?
Yeah.
Yes, madam, it's visible.
So as you can see, the title of the study is Cash Poor and PERK Rich, Civil Service Compensation, Incentives, Dissatisfaction, and Costs. And before I get to the presentation, we have a little video that sort of summarizes It's very slow. Summarizes our study. It's just 2 minutes long.
Pakistan's civil service is a relic of its colonial past. Since independence, many efforts have been made to reform the civil service, but no substantial structural changes have resulted. The emphasis of most reform commissions and committees has been on granting arbitrary increases in pay. Surprisingly, despite tinkering with the civil servants' pay, there have been no real effort to estimate civil servants' costs to the government. The much-needed analysis is done in the PIDE study, Cash Poor, PERK, PLOTS, Privileges, Rich, Civil Service Compensation, Incentives, Dissatisfaction, and Costs. The study addresses the questions such as whether civil servants are underpaid compared with similar private sector employees, how much do the benefits, including housing and cars, cost to the government, what are the sources of the fragmented civil servant structure, and what is the total cost of a civil servant to the government. The analysis reveals interesting answers. The myth that civil servants are underpaid compared with private sector employees does not have much substance. The civil servants, especially those in higher grades, are better paid than their comparison groups. The civil servants' basic salaries are indeed low, but when various perks and privileges are included, the civil servants are better paid. The allowances, in fact, are a big chunk of the civil servants' total compensation. The cost of these different in-kind benefits to the government is enormous. The perks and privileges not only make the compensation structure of the civil servants complex, but it is also a source of dissatisfaction among the employees of different government entities. The source of dissatisfaction arises because these benefits are not uniformly distributed. Instead, the employees of influential occupational groups, departments, and ministries get more benefits than other occupational groups, departments, and ministries. The best way forward is to compensate the civil servants on par with the private sector and monetize most of the benefits. Benefit monetization is also one of the main messages of the new public management literature. Monetization makes the civil servants' salary structure more transparent, reduces the government's cost, and releases precious assets that can enhance Pakistan's growth.
Okay, so now you know that this study is about, we are looking in, there is a common belief that Pakistan civil servants are poorly paid, and there is a counter belief that there are hidden payments and rewards involved. So this study basically looks into the total cost of a civil servant. If we look into the issues linked to the civil service in Pakistan, I think this summarizes what ails our civil service. There is inequality in distribution of perks. There is waste of precious land for housing. There is lack of capacity in the civil service now. There is a pay and performance disconnect. There are marginalized, specialized groups, and there is a quest for grades and perks. If we go back to history, there have been many reforms with very little impact. If we count, there have been 29 reform commissions and committees, but hardly any tangible impact has been seen. And it's mainly because hardly any commission and committee looked into the structural changes into the civil service. And most of these commissions and committees made changes in the pay structure only. It was 1973 reforms that brought major changes. We can contest whether these changes were good or bad. We think they were not good because it introduced the unified pay scales that ultimately proved to be a big problem in our civil service. Some of the good recommendations were made in the Cornelius reforms, but they were reversed. They were never used. So from what we inherited from the British Raj, we are now
there's something wrong with the sound, it's breaking.
No, madam, it's
The audio, there's some problem with the audio.
No, madam, audio ठीक है आपकी तरफ से. सर रऊफ साहब आपकी तरफ से अपना कैमरा ऑफ कर लें. रऊफ साहब
नहीं, आपका जो है इस वक्त आपकी आवाज ठीक आ रही है, बट इनका
नहीं, मैडम की आवाज ठीक आ रही है.
चले अब देखें, हमने यहाँ एक था उसका वॉल्यूम ऑफ किया, मे बी दैट वुड हेल्प.
अब ठीक हो गया.
So what we inherited was there were 600 grades and perks for mainly the whites that were introduced by the British when they were in the subcontinent. And from there, the major shift came with the unified pay scale, which left the generalist on top. The perks became an issue. And now as we see the civil service pay structure now, it's a fraying system. It's fragmented already with allowances, perks, and new scales being introduced. So the unified pay scale practically isn't there, but it's still affecting the whole system. There are budgetary controls and there are human resource management issues as well. If you look at the current wage system, I think this summarizes our current wage system very well. If you look at the column on the left, that's the current rewards that the civil servants are looking for. First are the cash payments, which includes the basic pay and the cash allowances, including transport, medical, housing, utilities, travel, special pay allowances, etc., etc. Then there are current rewards that are in kind, which include government housing in expensive downtown areas, generous health reimbursements, transport, car, and in some cases, subsidized child education. And then there are intangible, and I may add here that the cost we have calculated does not include a lot of intangible rewards, because we could not get hold of any information on the number of members in different prestigious clubs or board members. So our cost excludes this. In intangible rewards, we have job security, the social privilege and prestige attached to these positions, trips abroad, foreign training, club memberships, and board memberships. Then there are future expectations as well. Again, there are of four kinds. First is the cash payments in the shape of pension, then in-kind arbitrary awards of valuable city and agricultural land, intangible reputation, re-employment after retirement, and some special future expectations that are linked to foreign training programs, board positions with monetary payments. A current wage system is plagued by allowances. A lot of allowances, they pervade the whole wage structure of the civil servants. Huge number of allowances, and we looked at the AGPR data. There are certain entities that were getting paid under 140 different accounting heads. Then there are uniform increments. There is no link of these increments with performance or relative skills of the civil servants. Here, I've just listed a few of these allowances with their codes, which are as they are entered in the AGPR ledgers. And it's a huge number of allowances. And some of them you can't even make out how is one allowance different from the other. I mean, if you look at the mobility allowance, consolidation traveling, special traveling, on the next page, there is another allowance, just traveling, design allowance, special allowance. I mean, for an outsider, it is very, very difficult to understand what these allowances are about. If you look at one of the allowances here, it's unattractive area allowance. In this sheet, you see remote area allowance, hard area allowance, hill allowance, traveling allowance. So there is a lot of confusion in these allowances, and you can say that these become very arbitrary when you look at different cadres. So as I said before, that the structure has already become fragmented, and there are issues with career progression as well, which is resulting in loss to the professionals as well. There is brain drain, and the public sector enterprises are also suffering because of these issues. How is the unified pay scales broken? We have now the management pay scales, which has its 3 tiers. Then we have special pay scales with its 14 stages, which is already introduced in a lot of organizations, including Atomic Energy Commission, FBR, and NAB, among other institutions. Then we have judiciary, which is paid by the Supreme Court. They have very high salaries, along with generous allowances and other benefits. And if you look at some of the allowances, I mean, they are weird sounding allowances. special judicial, housing, medical, a chauffeur-driven car, contingent staff, unlimited utility bills, garden charges, and even a generator charge, an allowance for a generator. So I think they are certain that the power outages are not going away. They have included it as an allowance in their pay. Career progression, I mean, most of the cadres can go by law to grade 22, but if you look at the distribution, you see some of the cadres being overrepresented here. If you look at the professionals on the top, the doctors and the teachers, none of them can be found in BPS 22, while just a minuscule 0.1% can be found in BPS 21. The secretariat group, the public administrative services, and the foreign services overrepresent in BPS 21 and 22. And this is something that even bothers people within the civil service as well. So what are the main issues? It's linked to pay, incentives, and performance. There's a disconnect between pay and performance. There is no incentive to upgrade skills. I mean, if you're getting equal increments, if performance is not linked to your salary, there is no incentive to upgrade your skills. And the annual confidential reports, they don't say much about any worker. They are usually good reports for everyone. They are not exactly linked to the performance. And there are issues of wage overlaps. The unified pay scale introduced in the 1973 reforms created anomalies and decreased productivity and incentive to work. You see a lot of wage overlaps between different BPS grades. Then there are very lengthy pay scales. A person has to wait a lot of years to move to the next grade. And this creates inefficiency, and they are obviously uneconomic. Then there are issues of wage compression. I mean, usually we hear that the wage compression in Pakistan has reduced with time and it's under 10 now. But when we calculated, if you just look at the basic pay, yes, it's under 10. But if we add the total cash payments, the compression ratio increases to 17%. And if we add the total cost, which includes the cash and the non-monetized perks, the ratio becomes 1 to 24 almost. So it's basically the perks that makes the difference. And here, I mean, the jury is out whether compression or decompression is good. Some of the countries, they experimented by decompressing their wage structure and had better results. So this is something which should not be taken as an indicator, but the idea that the salaries are compressed in Pakistan is not exactly true. Coming to the valuing of benefits, we started with valuing the houses. The report has all the details. I won't go into the details. We asked for the market price of the houses through Zameen.com, through real estate agents, and that's how we calculated the market value of the accommodation that's given to the civil servants. Most of these houses are on prime lands close to the downtown area, and the current minimum market value of these houses is 1.45 trillion. Next is transport. Despite monetization, official cars are being used, and the value that we got estimated for the federal civil servants is approximately rupees 1.5 billion. Then it's the medical. Medical is again bifurcated into the medical allowance that they get every month in their pay slip, and the other that they get through reimbursement. So roughly 2.3 billion are being paid monthly in medical bills, and 1.1 billion is part of the salary, their monthly salary. Then there are future benefits, pension. 70% of the last drawn basic salary is their pension, and for some it even goes up to 120 to 140%. And the pension goes on for generations at times. I mean, there are conditions in which it's not just the death of the pensioner that ends the pension, but it can go on. The daughter, the unmarried daughter, the handicapped children. Future benefits also includes the real estate, because in some cadres and for some grades, obviously the higher grades, land is reserved, and these plots are handed over at considerably much lower rates than the market price. And the prices shoot up immediately after the land is allotted to the officers. Even the files can have much more value than what the officer paid for. And the officer pays only the land cost, which the government incurs at the time of land procurement, while all the development charges are borne by the government. Coming to the total cost of civil servants, this is our methodology, how we calculated the total cost. The first is the cash payment, which is equal to the total wage bill, which includes the monetary wage at each grade, the rental ceiling, which the public servant receives at each grade, the medical allowance of each grade, the conveyance allowance of each grade, monetized transport facility. Obviously, that's just for grade 20, 21, and 22, and other allowances, which include the special pay allowance, the ad hoc allowance, the senior post allowance, the orderly allowance, and the qualification allowance. Then we calculated, that was just the cash value, then the actual total cost, which included the monetary wage, which we saw on the previous slide, plus the perks cost. And the perks include the medical cost. It includes the indoor patient charges, which are reimbursed upon submission of invoices, the shadow cost of the use of an official vehicle, the market rental value of government housing, the cost of other allowances, such as the use of servants provided by the government, the utility bills, all costs that are not included in the salary slip. So this is how the figures showed up. It is the allowances that tip the balance. If you look at grade 17, the percentage of allowances is 57%, and they increase sharply to 70% when we move to BPS 20 and above. And for 22, it's 73%. So it's not just the wage, it's the allowances that make up most of the pay that the civil servants are getting, and they are basically loaded for BPS 20 and above. Now, when we add the perks, again, the same balance, the percentage, now the wage and allowances are in one category, and the blue bars show the perks. Again, you can see the percentage added by the perks show a sharp increase after BPS 20. It's 53, it's highest for BPS 21, and then 57 for BPS 22. The allowances add the housing allowance, increase the salary by 45 to 55%, the ad hoc allowance by 10%, medical allowances add 15%, the special pay allowances add the cash payments by 20%. Perks are the real deal. The proportion of cash allowances and pay and quantified perks and the total cost increases as the grade increases, as we saw in the two figures I've shown above. Government housing facility given as an in-kind benefit has never been accounted for in the total cost of the civil servants. Perks and different allowances add to the total cost of civil servants substantially, and if monetized, would break the myth of low salaries in the public sector. So are the public servants poorly compensated? We compared what the public servants are getting with what some of the international employees are getting in Pakistan, and also those employed in the private sector. In this graph, there is a comparison of the locally hired, these are not the international pay scales, but the locally hired UN's D-level grade employees, and which we think are comparable to BPS 20 and 22. And if you look at the graph, you can see that pays are higher for the lower grades in the UN compensation, but as we go up for 21 and 22, the balance is towards the BPS compensation. Those hired in the UN D-level grades get less than what a BPS 22 employee is getting with all the allowances, wage, and perks costed, they get more than the D-level employees in the UN system. This is another international comparison, the wage premium ratio for public sector employees in selected countries. And here you can see that the wage premium is among the highest, the second highest in this graph, but it's among the highest in Pakistan. And these figures are coming from the World PIDE bureaucracy indicators of the World Bank. It's highest in South Asia and ranks highest among the world as well. Then we compared what the public sector is getting from the private sector in Pakistan. And this graph shows the normalized mean salary by education. And it's for all educational levels, all plus metric, inter, bachelor's, master's, the public sector employees get more than the private. And these estimates have been done from the labor force survey. For every educational level, the public sector employees get more than the private sector, except if a person has an MPhil or a PhD. And I'm not certain how many in the public sector have an MPhil or a PhD. So in general, for all educational levels, the compensation is higher in the BPS scales than in the private sector. Talking of non-monetary benefits, here you can see that in the private sector, 80% of the employees get no non-monetary benefit, while for the public sector, the proportion is just 7%, and a huge 30% gets 5 or more non-monetary benefits. So it reinforces the idea that's coming out from the previous slides as well, that it's not just the cash payments, but a lot of other things that make up the compensation structure for a public sector employee. Here are the proportions of the total pay that they get in public and private sector. Here again, you can see the proportion of non-monetary benefits in the total wage are higher for all educational levels in the public sector as compared to the private sector. So what is the way forward? We looked into the international experience. We looked into Malaysia, Korea, Singapore. We remained in Asia to see what they've done. And the message we got was that monetize as many perks and benefits as possible, link total compensation with performance, reduce the number of grades and the number of employees, keep the option of lateral entry open, and give competitive salaries to civil servants in comparison to the private sector for quality intake. It's basically the idea that's being given in the new public management idea of running the public sector. And we believe that we have to do the same in Pakistan. We need to monetize our perks and benefits to bring clarity to our pay structure. Public sector wages should be commensurate with the private sector based on a survey of private sector wages. Increments must be linked with performance. Uniform increments make no sense. They are a disincentive for work. Government housing, start monetization of government housing with grades 19 to 22 officers and move down sequentially. Land freed up through housing monetization must be used productively, like for high-rise accommodation buildings, commercial construction, and social infrastructure. Transport fully, and I would say actually monetize the transport facility. Those needing cars should be given one on leasing arrangements with banks. That way, I mean, all the monetary tasks would be of the bank and not the civil servants and the official setup itself. Health insurance, the private sector has tried private health insurance, and I think the government needs to make that move too. It will strengthen the financial system as well. Move from defined benefit to the defined contribution pension system. This needs to be done. We are already stressed in paying our pensions. The pension bill is getting too big. So this needs to be done to make pension payouts sustainable in the long run. Reduce the lower grade staff. This is already being done. So what we suggest is that employees working in lower grades account for 85% of the civil servants' total wage bill. Most of these jobs have become redundant. Existing sanction posts that are not occupied should be abolished, and it will release resources to finance any revision in salaries of the other grades. The unified pay scales need to go. We need to eliminate those, define the federal service for the new system. There is a confusion. Even while doing this study, it was at times a little difficult to define what we mean when we say the civil servants. The lines become a little blurred. So we need to demarcate exactly what we mean by the federal service. We need to allow different professions and merit systems. There should be career progression for professionals. Like we saw, the doctors and the teachers, they were nowhere to be found in BPS 21 and 22. No more pay commissions. There should be a proper wage setting systems, and what that wage setting system should be, this is what we suggest. Do a market survey. There should be a parliamentary or a cabinet body that we can deliberate what it should be, which can decide for a discount. The annual indexation should partly be an indexation and partly decided on the basis of merit. And there should be an annual and a 10-year adjustment to these scales. It should be a win-win reform. Why? Because valuable assets would be released, which would lead to growth and employment. The employees would have more cash in hand with better pensions, healthcare, and we believe it would be happier employees and an efficient government. I would be a happier person when, instead of having a house with a value of 5 lakhs per month, and I have those 5 lakhs in my hand. So we believe that it would be happier employees if they get cash payments instead of such kind of non-monetary perks. And the transport system we have suggested, it would integrate the civil and otherwise as well, even for the land. It would integrate the civil service with market, leading to more growth and employment. And we believe it is time to reform. Otherwise, our whole bureaucratic apparatus is gearing fast towards dysfunctionality. This is our report. It would be online by 12:30. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Nayab. Thank you very much. I'll not say anything more. I'll just proceed quickly. Nargis, do you want to say something now, or shall we wait for the discussants?
I think we should wait.
Okay. Jamil Saab, Jamil Nasir, then perhaps you can go first.
Thank you, Darsa. I congratulate PIDE and its team on a very comprehensive report. The report has come up with a number of issues and then solutions for that. I was searching for the data that what other developed countries are spending on the civil servants. And when I look, in terms of GDP, France is spending almost 12.6%. Germany is spending 7.7%. And UK is spending almost 9%. I'm not sure what, in GDP terms, what Pakistan is spending as public sector wages. Certainly, there will be some figure in the report, and we have to have a look at that. Where do we stand? And then in terms of employment wage compression thing, it is true that when we compare with the private sector, the premium is high in the public sector. When we take all the employees of the public sector into account, it is almost 63% higher. But as we go up with the qualification thing, and we reach the tertiary level of the education, then that premium reduced to almost 10%. And these are the figures of 2014 worldwide bureaucracy indicators of the World Bank. And there is another point that as far as the highly qualified people are concerned, those who possess tertiary education, most of the people are employed in the public sector. private sector is not absorbing that much percentage. That is almost 10% of the tertiary employees in the private sector and almost 40% of the employees having tertiary education are employed in the public sector. And the worldwide trend is also the same, that most of the people of the tertiary having tertiary education are employed in the public sector compared to the private sector, which the worldwide indicators show. And that's the one point. Then, while setting any wage thing or while discussing any compensation thing for the public sector, the important point is that we have to keep in mind that the private and the public sectors, are two different things. And we may borrow the management practices, etc., but there is a wide difference between these two sectors. State has almost a long horizon, and it has to spend in that way. It doesn't have much scope to fix the wages like the performance pay wages, etc. It is difficult to find out the variables for measurement of the performance in the public sector. It is easy in the private sector that there will be so much sales, so much profit, so much access to the customers, but it is difficult to find out the variables for the public service delivery. So that's the point, and it has to be kept in view while comparing private sector and the public sector. Then we come to the point of the report that I beg to differ a bit here. The case is not that they are overpaid, the case is of the inequities. For example, a BPS 20 officer is getting around 40,000 as house rent in his pay. And if you go to the market and if you are stationed at some big city, I'm not sure that he can get a reasonable house on rent in 40,000. Issue is that some civil servants are getting housing from the government while others are not getting. Others are getting the allowance. So this inequity is the problem. And the solution which the report is coming that these should be monetized, that is perhaps a good step forward and can be deliberated upon. For example, a guy who is employed in BPS 20 and he's getting a house in GR Lahore, which is spanning over 4 canals or 6 canals. And if we go for the market rent, the market rent will be in lakhs, not in thousands. On the other hand, a guy who is also in BPS 20, but he's not getting a house in GOR, and the government is paying him the amount for requisition of the housing, that is almost around 40,000, and perhaps he cannot buy a reasonable house in that amount. That's the problem. So the solution is that certainly what PIDE report is saying, there should be some monetization thing. So these inequities among the civil servants are reduced to the minimum. And these also affect the performance of the civil servants, and it bring amongst them low satisfaction about their job. So that's the one point. The second point which we miss in the entire debate about the public service, that is we concentrate on the compensation and the performance of the senior employees, but we ignore in all our reports, in our discussion, the employees whom we call the frontline workers. And these frontline officers who interact with the masses face to face, we do not pay much attention to the training, we do not pay much attention to their meritocratic recruitment, and that brings in the problem. And the problems of the low performance and the low trust in the civil service, which we are witnessing these days, those arise from the same situation. That in the past decades, we recruited the frontline employees, perhaps not through the Public Service Commission and the consideration other than the merit. And when they interact with the masses, certainly their public service delivery is not up to the mark, and it brings dissatisfaction and low trust. That's the one point. And attached to this is what the literature calls bureaucratic overload. We are talking of the salary, perks, and the privileges of the senior management, but we are unable to provide the frontline workers with the facilities, with the physical infrastructure that they can do the proper service delivery. What happens is that the senior management, due to this bureaucratic overload, is busy the entire day in firefighting. And their precious time, which they can concentrate on planning, on doing some long-term work for the organization, is crowded out due to this firefighting. So that's another point. And whatever the report is there, it should not remain confined to the salaries of It's very much important if we want to bring in efficiency and productivity in the public sector, and if we want to improve the image of the public sector in the eyes of the people. So that's another point. Then there is the issue that why, at the one point we are saying that the civil servants are overpaid, but at the same time there is dissatisfaction with the structure and with the salary among the civil, which is being paid to the civil servants. So what are the reasons? That's a very pertinent question. The first thing is that whatever the salary is to be done or to be fixed, there are 2 points which should be kept in view. One is that you cannot compare the salary with a guy who has different skill sets. So skill set is to be compared with the similar skill set. That's the one point. And the second point is, while setting the salary, you have to remain in certain geographical boundaries. For example, if you are a graduate from Harvard, but if you are working in Pakistan and other graduate working from Harvard is working in US, you cannot compare the salaries of the 2 guys. So you will be comparing it with a Harvard guy who is working in the private sector in Pakistan. So that's the one point. The satisfaction arises among the civil servants when they compare, not in a proper way. So they are comparing with their peer groups. They are comparing, wrongfully. So that's their benchmarking is perhaps wrong in comparing. That brings in the dissatisfaction. And the second source of dissatisfaction is the inequities, which I have already alluded to, that certain guys are getting in-kind compensation, and when in-kind compensation is there, then the amount of salary when it is converted into the rupee values goes very high. And those who are not getting in-kind compensation, rather they are getting the compensation in terms of rupees, then they are perhaps not properly compensated for that. That's the point. So these inequities need to be fixed. These need to be taken care of. Then the question is about, this is also connected to the management practices thing. You cannot see the compensation structure in isolation. The frequent posting transfers and less autonomy while working, these are the issues. These reduce the performance of the civil servant. So we have to connect it with the management practices which are prevalent in the public sector. So those should also be taken into account while bringing in any reform or change in the compensation structure of the civil service. Then the point is of the performance pay, that how we can link the performance pay to the performance. That's a very tedious question in the public sector, because the variables differ. The type of services which are being provided by the public sector, those are different. For example, if public sector is providing subsidized health and subsidized education, so there is no competition from the private sector. So there is a limiting factor to the competition in the public sector. So it is a very difficult thing. So we have to come up with the variables as how how we can, introduce competition in a way that the performance is measured. Now the government has started with performance packs, and there can be, in a nutshell, only two things: that how much time is taken in giving a public service or in disposing a certain thing which a civil servant is tasked with, and what is the quality of that. So this is the basic thing to start with. So these are certain points on this report, and if required, I will come back again. Thank you. Dr. Saab, you are not audible. I'm unable to hear you.
Thank you very much, Jamil Saab. Very good comments. I think I appreciate your point about the inequity, appreciate your point about the junior employees, the frontline workers, appreciate your point about the dissatisfaction, about the comparators in the geography, and then, of course, the working conditions. Those are all important points, and we should talk about them, of course. Rauf Saab, your viewpoint in the next 10 minutes, quickly. Rauf Hassan, can you unmute yourself, please? क्या हुआ राउफ साहब? Is he gone? चेक करें.
सर राहुल साहब मेरे ख्याल डिस्कनेक्ट हुए हैं सर.
डिस्कनेक्ट हुए हैं, देखें. He's not there.
नहीं सर, वो नजर नहीं आ रहा.
Okay. In that case, Madam Chairman, Chairperson Nargis Sethi, can you please give your thoughts? Then we'll go to the floor.
Okay. Thank you so much. Let me begin by congratulating the authors of this report. Let me begin by congratulating the authors of this report in conducting a valuable research on a very interesting and much talked about subject. For me personally, it is always a pleasure to be part of any debate on matters concerning the civil service of Pakistan, and listening to such well-intentioned and informed research as presented by this learned group, led by the Vice Chancellor, Dr. Nadeemullah, and I'm sure a lot of hard work has gone into this research effort. Well, let me share with you that I found the reports to be so interesting that I went through it in one go. So please allow me to share my comments on the subject. In my view, that a report or a research paper or a study indicates the author's intention and the direction in which they would like to steer the conclusion. And in doing so, sometimes objectivity is the common casualty. Well, having been part of the civil service myself and having served at senior level, it is difficult for me to identify with some of the summarized conclusions drawn in various tables and numerical formulations so meticulously and painstakingly prepared by the author. In my very humble opinion, the report touches upon a large number of issues related to the civil service reform in one breath, and in doing so, quite honestly shifts from its primary focus on the pay structures and allowances, and whether these are commensurate with the duties and responsibilities assigned at different levels of civil service. As such, clubbing discussion on issues such as non-cash rewards, inequality in distribution of PERK, waste of precious land for housing, bias between cadred and non-cadred officials, marginalized specialized groups, pay and performance disconnect, shifts the focus away from the discussion of inadequacy or otherwise of the compensation received by the civil service. Well, I found the comparison of compensation drawn between a UN employed national level officer with a civil servant of a certain level rather amusing. Well, the report chronology lists various pay commissions and committees that have thus far worked on civil service reform, starting from 1948 and till 2010, and comment that little progress has been made in measuring performance and new ways of rewarding it. It does not really discuss whether any adequate implementation mechanisms were provided by these commissions and what was their fate of implementation. I much admire the report's use of mathematical stipulation and numerical tabulation in advancing the arguments which appeal to common readers. However, a closer look at some of these tables read in conjunction with preceding paragraph gives the vague intention. In my opinion, it does not do justice to a well-written and researched report such as this one to correctly interpret facts and then link them with accounting models without even explaining the accounting universe under which they operate. Please allow me to illustrate this point. For example, while constructing the arbitrary allowance argument under the caption allowances per weight, the report uses a table, I think table 1, to suggest that the number of head of account shown against respective ministries, divisions, departments are the numerous allowances paid to employees working under these ministries, divisions, and departments. An equally misleading illustration is presented in a box, if I correctly recall, box 12, related to a list generated code-wise for selected allowances admissible to different officials performing different duties. While it mentions non-practicing an anesthesia allowance, it does not state who and under what circumstances are these allowances admissible. Anesthetics perform duties on call as their services are required at unexpected hours and times. Nowhere does the report explain that these number of head of account are simply the listing of new chart of classification introduced under new accounting models under the World Bank's Project for Improving Financial Reporting and Auditing, commonly known as PIFRA. Having remained, the Principal Accounting Officer of Cabinet Division, Ministry of Health, Economic Affairs Division, Ministry of Defense, and Water and Power, to mention a few, I can well understand and appreciate it. Well, the first chapter concludes with a sub-para caption, Dissatisfaction and False Debate, which set me thinking and wondering whether, the civil servants are the only variable in constructing compensation adequacy formula. And I repeat, the civil servants are the only variable in constructing compensation adequacy formula, a subject, I guess, left for debate on another day. This by no means take away the great passion and dedication that has been put in preparation of this report. While going through the second chapter, the discussion moved toward the fragmented structure and career progression. Again, to substantiate this point, the report uses a figure which provides the maximum grade that can be achieved in each service of others. Having remained in charge of the career planning wing at a middle level in my service in the establishment division, and by virtue of this position, I interacted with different service groups. I wonder if all careers in the private or corporate sector lead to the position of managing director or chief executive officer or chairman or whatever the highest position of the organization is called. While I recognize that distortion within different allowances call for an exercise of rationalization, I do hope that the authors recognize that civil service extends beyond Islamabad and includes the provinces and other allied departments and organizations. Then there is another table, I think table 3, which is very interesting. The report highlights the fact that 73% of the available housing in Islamabad is allotted to lower grade officials. Going by this, the same may be true in other cities mentioned in the table. In this context, I would like to understand where and how does the 73% group draw PERK as so often highlighted and also elaborated in the wage and reward structure presented in the report. Besides, while recounting the perks and privileges that create inequality, the report does not highlight the fact that when a major urban center like the capital city was being planned for construction in the 1960s, the planners ensured provision of government schools and colleges, both boys and girls, in every sector, where today the lower grade employees reside. In the absence of this, I wonder how many would have been able to provide education to their children, as commercialization of education in the private sector is a recent phenomenon. If in good faith and for the sake of equitable distribution of resources, one was to accept the following tables on the face value. There's a table which talks about federal government house with market rental value. The calculations have been based on the mean debt platform. And there's a table which talks about valuing the government-owned houses. Value estimates have been created using the mean.com. Then valuing the official car. Authors' calculations have been done on zero down payment. In my view, an implementation plan with timelines to undertake this reform should have been presented in the report along with interim measures for occupants, especially 73% of lower grade officials with families, whose children await government schools, which would presumably be also not there along with the official housing. While the report is exhaustive in placing price tags on government assets, it falls short of suggesting an implementation strategy across the board that includes all government departments, civil and law enforcement agencies, and mind you, civil law enforcement agencies constitute a major percentage of the employees in the federal government, somewhere around 70%. Entities that draw resources from the federal consolidated fund operated through the government exchequer, public sector enterprises and attached department, provincial government. Many studies that have been undertaken over the years on the subject have focused more on diagnosis, which is rightly, very rightly, in fact, the first step. However, they fall short of suggesting a way forward and implementation strategy for the government, as has also been highlighted by the report with reference to various committees and commissions. In my view, any research or debate on civil service compensation must cover the complete spectrum of civil service, both in federal and provincial government. Because if we confine our study to only the federal government, or more specifically to Islamabad, then it will not realistically portray the situation on ground. In the end, I would like to say that Pay and Pension Commission 2020 would be very happy to associate with Pakistan Institute of Development Economics in conducting a joint study on the subject of compensation for civil service in the entire country, so that we are able to get a more holistic and realistic picture. I thank PIDE very much for a thought-provoking endeavor and presenting a new dimension to explore out-of-box solutions to problems that have developed over a period of time. It would only be befitting that the correction is also charted over a period of time. I thank you.
Thank you, Madam Sethi. Ms. Sethi, thank you very much. Very perceptive comments, very perceptive comments. We have to take these into account, of course. I thank you for this. And of course, PIDE is a government organization. We stand ready to work with you in whatever capacity you suggest. And obviously, we will be ready to help you however you like. And this study is only meant to excite some discussion and talk about things. But of course, we need to talk to you more. And we will, inshallah, do that. We are very happy to have Abdul Wajid Rana here too, ex-finance secretary. Rana Saab, would you like to say something? Wajid Rana?
Thank you, Dr. Nadeem. I'll restrict my comments on two things.
Sure.
One, on the application of new public management theory.
Sure.
I mean, while the author has done a great deal of work, in recommending the NPM to the government sector in Pakistan. I wish she had studied the criticism that has emerged from most of the Western countries on NPM theory and its application to the public sector during the last 3 decades. The findings of the Australian Reform Commission is that the cost of small achievement is far too high to consider the application of NPM to the public sector, because the objectives of the NPM and public administration is completely different and diverse. While the private sector focuses on the bottom line, the public sector is more concerned about the service delivery and quality, as rightly pointed out by Jamil Nasser. So I think we need to be very careful and consider the criticism that has emerged on NPM while making such recommendations for the public sector. My second comment would be, I think that she has done a great deal of effort in compiling the report, but it apparently seemed that there are far too many generalizations in terms of understanding the applicability of allowances to all the public servants. And the study probably needs to probe into further in right understanding of the pay structure and allowances and cost, sort of calculating the cost of true cost of public wage in the public sector. And I guess the comparison with the UN system probably needs a revisit, because maybe we are not comparing the apples with the apples in terms of BPS 22 to a UN system pay scale. So I'll stop here, and these are my initial comments. I've yet to get a copy of the report, and maybe I'll get back to you or the author on that report. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Wajid. Absolutely, we will look forward to your comments, and they will be most welcome. The report will be made available to you immediately. So Shahbaz Rana Sahab. Shahbaz Rana, you had your hand up. Do you want to say anything? I think it's gone. Okay, anybody else wants to say anything? Mahmood Khalid. Go ahead, Mahmood Khalid.
Thank you, sir. Very small and quick query. Do you think that during your study you have found that the establishment division is actually playing a kind of a human resource manager for the public service at large, or has it been always the finance division which is going to set up that what sort of pays and other perks should be decided?
Okay. Interesting thought. If there are any other questions, please raise your hand now and speak, or else we'll get to Shahbaz Rana. Is that Shahbaz Rana? Yeah, go ahead, Shahbaz Rana.
Thank you, Dr. I have a couple of questions. First of all, डॉक्टर साहब आपको याद होगा, मैडम नरगिस सेठी को भी, कि 2011 में जो कार मोनेटाइजेशन हुई थी, इसके जो रूअर वहाँ थे, आप दोनों थे उस वक्त, और हमने इसके ऊपर उस वक्त काफ़ी लिखा भी था. लेकिन अभी जब हम बाहर गली में जाते हैं और मोटरवे के ऊपर जाते हैं, तो गाड़ियाँ जनाटे भरते हुए हमारे पास से गुजर जाती हैं और हमें आप दोनों याद आते हैं और हम कुछ कर नहीं सकते. तो आप चाहते हैं कि क्या वही रिपीट हो? आप हाउसिंग मोनेटाइजेशन की भी बात कर रहे हैं और बाकी सारी चीज़ों की भी. तो सेकेंडली, इसका जो आप बात कर रहे हैं कि कंपेटिटिव सैलरीज होनी चाहिए और इनका पैकेजेस सारे होने चाहिए, और साथ ही आप ये कह रहे हैं कि जो पब्लिक सेक्टर इज पेड मोर देन द प्राइवेट सेक्टर. So are you essentially suggesting the cut in the public sector salaries? Thank you.
Good point, Shahbaz साहब. देखिए, मोनेटाइजेशन के जो रखवाले होते हैं वो मीडिया वाले होते हैं, तो आप जरूर रखवालापन करें, लिखें. आप लिखते ही नहीं हैं, आप बार बार IMF और वर्ल्ड बैंक पे लिखते हो, तो हम क्या करें? Anybody else, folks? If not, chale, I'll go back to Nayab. Do you have anything to say? Naseem Faraz, another one of the authors. Naseem, you want to say something?
Thank you so much. Thanks so much. These are very nice comments, and some of them are, we would like to address in this report. We have, tried to make first attempt to quantify the compensation to the public sector employees, and there might be some generalization, and we will address these generalizations. And so far, if you look at the literature, and you see we can't find such studies, and we can't find some evidences to highlight these issues like inequality between the wages which is paid to the implies across the grades, and also the issue of performance and rewards is not discussed before, and this report highlight this, like the the performance, the grade wise, you see every year ACRs submitted, but there is no criteria, there is no merit to link the performance of the employees. And the role of trainings also not linked to the performance and to the adequacy of the training. So in that way, we are trying to highlight these issues in this report, so that government and also the problem of issue pension, increasing, it's like a pension bomb. So we are highlighting these issues so that government should take some points and should take policy guidelines for the reform process already undergo, so that it will provide insight like where we have to look in future. That's all from my side. Thank you.
Umar Saab, would you like to say something?
Yeah. Assalamu alaikum ji. Thank you very much, everyone, for very, very nice and comprehensive comments. I will address only a few. Yes, Jameel Nasir Saab said that expenditures on civil services in Pakistan as a percentage of GDP. Yes, it is quite low. But the countries you have mentioned, like France and Germany, they have a bit of different system. They are leaning more towards a social welfare state. So that's the reason they have a huge number of employees in the public sector. Then there was a comment about the applicability of allowances across the board. Yes, we have not said that all these allowances that we have mentioned in our report are applicable across the board. They are allowed only to a few entities, and that's the reasons for one of the for inequalities. Provinces, yes, ideally we should have also taken into account provinces as well, but getting the data only for the federal government is such a pain that we dreaded the thought of going to the provinces and getting the data. Ideally, yes, it should also be provinces should also be covered. And Shehbaz Rana Saab said that the report is saying that the public sector is overpaid better than the private sector. Actually, what we are saying is that if we take into account all the perks in kind or cash, in that case, they are overpaid. They are in a lot of the cases, the whole benefit does not go to the civil servants, but it nevertheless costs the government. So what we are suggesting is, we are not suggesting that they should be handed a cut in their salaries. No, that is absolutely not our recommendation. What we are suggesting is that if we monetize as much perks and in-kind benefits as we can, it will make the system transparent and bring the public sector salaries at on par with the private sector. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mehtab Haider, did you want to say anything? Mehtab Haider had his hand up. Mehtab Haider, are you there? Has he gone?
Sir, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you. Fine. Go ahead.
सर पहले तो आपकी जो recommendations हैं PIDE की, can you elaborate that you want to implement in the next Pay and Pension Commission report 1 or 2 major recommendations which you want to see to be implemented? और दूसरा सर ये बताएं कि ये जो आपकी recommendations हैं, इनकी total अगर तमाम perks and privileges को monetize कर दिया जाए, तो इसकी गवर्नमेंट को कितनी कॉस्ट आएगी? थैंक यू।
Fair enough. पहली चीज तो देखिए, Pay and Pension Commission will, Nargis Sethi is here and she's going to do her work and she's going to make a recommendation. So PIDE has nothing to do with it. PIDE will assist her if she requires it. So PIDE is an assisting agency and not really something that we can say that is binding. Our job is to kind of excite people into a discussion, into understanding what things should be like and how things should be managed. तो हमने तो ये एक रिपोर्ट की है इसलिए कि तो थोड़ा सा इस पे रोशनी तो डले, because after all ये चीजें बड़ी डिबेट होती हैं, but there is really no discussion, no research on this. And like any research, no one is saying that our research is definitive, but it's an important piece of work because it does elevate the subject up. Now, if the government is in disagreement, by all means, the government should issue a report. In fact, I would argue, and I would implore Nargis Sethi and the ex-finance secretary, that the government should put out a report every year, annually. The establishment division, somebody asked, what is the establishment division doing? I think that's very correct. It is the job of the establishment division to give us civil service compensation data and not just wage data. We need the data. Where are the perks? Where are the houses? It's useless telling us कि allowances ये हैं वो हैं, हम जाके देखें भाई हमने तो AGPR से लिए हैं, हमने establishment division में जो listed है वो लिए हैं. हमें transparency ज़्यादा देंगे तो हम ज़्यादा अच्छा काम कर सकेंगे. अगर transparency नहीं दे रहे, अगर ये कह रहे हैं कि transparency नहीं, इसकी वजह से आप इसको ignore कर दें, that is not a good excuse. I think we should have more and more data. वो disclosure भी आ गया है कि the government needs to disclose. Yes, we should. Second thing, we deliberately did this in the federal government. After the 18th Amendment, there is no reason to consider the provincial government a part of the federal government. This should be the federal government we should talk about. Provincial government is a totally separate entity, so is local government. ये जो भुट्टो के reforms, the socialist reforms of 1973, which have led to the disaster where everybody is on one wage scale, जिसकी वजह से the technocrats are extremely downtrodden, and the generalists rule. This reform was a Bhutto construct, and that has led to a huge amount of difficulty. With the result that abhi tak warfare chal rahi hai between the PMS and the various other agencies. All of them are fighting with each other all the time, jockeying for power. I think this thing has to end, but that's a totally different subject. On compensation, we agree. We've noted it again and again. Not everybody gets houses. And so Jamil Nasir is right. There's an extreme degree of inequity. Yes, we should note that inequity, but that doesn't mean that those who get houses and those who get the perks don't do very well. We know, for example, we document this next, board memberships. Nobody documents this, but board memberships are extremely well paid. We know that. National Bank, for example, one board meeting gives you 2 lakh rupees or something like that, and that there can be 4 or 5 board meetings a day. We know that DFIs give you $5,000 per board meeting, and those board meetings can be held outside the country. Habib Bank meetings are held in Paris. And on most of these boards, we've done an analysis of the board yesterday, you'll see it. Most of these boards, the civil servants are on the boards. So that is a huge issue that we should think about. So there are invisible forms of payments, and I think it is the public's right to know what the invisible forms of payments are. And we cannot give you a complete analysis of the cost of the government unless we get all those payments. Now, what we've got here, we can always aggregate this and give you a payment. It will be at least 3 or 4 times what the government wage bill is. and we have to talk about that. Then there is also a question of the blocked resources. When you've got city center land, we've written about it often, when you've got city center land that is being used at a low cost, it has a huge opportunity cost. And again, lots of people have written about it. Yes, we should talk about reallocating our assets so that we can get better growth. At the same time, there is also literature to show that compensation in kind often does not match the compensation received. The valuation of a house to the person who receives it may be less than what has been given. And this is adequately illustrated. For example, many of you have seen this. I have seen this in my own life. Somebody gives me a very expensive tie as a present. I don't value ties that much. So for me, the value of the tie is not the $400 the person has spent. For me, the value may be $5 or $10, right? So the person has spent $400, I've received $5 only. And this is an old economic trick that we use in our questions, exam questions, that the valuation received may not be, and that is why most economists say pay cash only. Now, when the government gives valuation and gifts in kind, by definition, the receipt is not as much as you expect, and therefore the dissatisfaction remains. And this is a subject, again, that on its own requires a lot of research. As to new public management, yes, of course, nobody is saying new public management is perfect, and we are not even talking about new public management here. We are talking about simple analysis of the compensation system and saying that the compensation system needs rationalization. The compensation system, as far as I can see, is a distorted system. It's a system that was left to us by the Brits. We have tampered with it. We have, in a sense, if you remember the old days when you used to fly kites in Basant or something, the kites, when they would tear, we'd put on what you called a chippy, on a little patch on the kite. After a while, the kite had so many chippies that the kite couldn't fly. This is the kind of thing that we've got now. We have put in so many chippies on this kite, we have put in so many things on this thing, that the system is cumbersome, non-transparent, and does not meet the needs of the civil servants or meet the needs of performance. Of course, performance in public sector is difficult to measure. Nobody's saying it's not difficult to measure, but at the same time, everybody's trying to measure performance. And ISHRS is trying to do that. We must all do that. Whether or not it's difficult, we have to measure performance. And when there are ways to measure performance, not accurately, not clearly, but nothing is measured accurately. Even GDP is measured with an error. Even inflation is measured with an error. There's no such thing in human life that is measured with certainty. Heisenberg principle applies everywhere. So I think we should look at it carefully. That look, we have to talk about this issue, and we have to take it seriously. And at some point, maybe the government will learn that they have to become transparent about their payment methods. And at the same time, the Bhutto UPS that we want to discard, like, for example, why should the universities have the same pay scale as the government? Why should, for example, railway have the same pay scale? Why should the army have the same pay scale? This is what Bhutto did. So everybody's grades 1 to 22, which I think was a silly exercise, because even in the old days, there was not one pay scale. So let the provinces have their own pay scale. Let the cities have their own pay scales. Let the police have their own pay scales. Let the universities have their own pay scales. And let's talk about civil service compensation. Right now, what's happening is, I see it right here in Qaid University, because the government officers have lovely houses. Qaid University has a lovely property. Half of it has been made into houses by the faculty. And they're enjoying these lovely houses set in the mountains. What a beautiful place. I'd like that job too. Same thing's happening at other universities. There is a land grab on for public housing. Should we accept that, or is it something that we should talk about? Shabad Rana, you want to come in again?
Sorry, I thought there is no other person, so I'll take the opportunity because no one was raising hand. Doctor, with your permission, I have a couple of questions for Madam Narga Sethi.
Go ahead.
Ma'am, Cabinet approved to give the management pay scales to the serving civil servants. Do you not think it is against the idea of and the principles of introducing the MPS scale? What is the fun of having MPS when the same bureaucrat will serve on the same pay scale? And secondly, what is the purpose of then having the Pay and Pension Commission when the government will take such decision in tits and bits and without having a consolidated approach towards it? Thank you.
Shabazz, may I
Please go
respond?
ahead. Please, Ji, please.
I agree with what you're saying, but I cannot make sure that the government does not take such decisions. बिल्कुल आप ठीक कह रहे हैं कि ये फैसले piecemeal manner में they should not be taken, and they should be, now there is a commission, so let the commission deliberate on these issues and make its recommendation, and then the government can decide whether they want to implement those recommendations or not. So they have recently taken a decision. I don't know, like who's somebody, whether that proposal was moved by the establishment division or by the institutional reforms unit, or I do not know it because I have not read in detail on the subject. But I tend to agree with you that decisions should not be taken in a piecemeal manner. And now that we have a commission which is looking at the pay, allowances, pension, everything, so let us make our recommendations, and then it is for the government to decide whether they can, which one of those recommendations they would like to implement, or how would they like to move forward on this. Thank you.
Thank you, Ji. Wajid Rana Sahab. Wajid Rana Sahab.
Can you hear me?
Yes,
Can you hear me now? Okay. I just want to respond to Shabazz Rana's question, which is very pertinent. And I think this is probably one of the most critical distortions that has been introduced. I don't know on whose recommendation. Apparently, it looks like a recommendation from the Institutional Reform Task Force, because the objective of introducing management pay scales and MP scales is totally different. And if we sort of open up this revolving door for the serving bureaucrats, it will introduce yet another distortion and maybe against the principle of transparency. The whole idea was to draw the experience of the private sector into public administration. And therefore, the regular servants must resign if they want to join any MP1 position. And I think probably that needs to be revisited instead of allowing the government servants, serving government servants, to go back and forth from BPS to MP scale and MP scale back to BPS. It will create same or similar kind of distortion, which is prevalent in the universities, that the professors at will can move back and forth from tenured pay scale to BPS pay scale if they don't make up to the tenured professor or tenured associate professor. Thank you.
Thank you, Wajid Sahab. Amir Ranja. Amir S. Ranja, please introduce yourself and tell us what you have to say.
Thank you, sir. First of all, I appreciate you guys for putting up such a nice and commendable effort. So my concern is like, can we address the issue of compensation by separating it from performance evaluation, which is very important in itself? Because like, unless we have a system which is fair, transparent, and merit-based, how can we talk about these things? Like one of the issue earlier, which was raised by the Rana Saab, like things are not at times transparent. For example, I will cite one example. I came across many ads about MP positions, MP1, MP2, MP3. For MP3 and MP2, I came across the qualification which was a doctoral degree in a certain subject. Okay, fine, that's understandable. Probably you want to have best qualified people for the MP3 and MP2 position. But for the MP1, which I have come across, there is no such qualification. The qualification is simple graduation. So that suggests that those MP1 positions are being left out, are being reserved for certain cadre or certain people. So how long will we continue with such distortions? And if we continue with such distortions, how can we have meaningful debate about compensation, which again, in the end, as Rana Saab earlier said, that he says that गाड़ियां इस तरह गुजरती हैं. So it will be happening again. I mean, we can have these things, but at the end of the day, we find that these policies are being manipulated, formulated to suit a certain few individuals. Thank you.
बिल्कुल ठीक कह रहे हैं आप, बट देखिए इसीलिए ये इदारे PID जैसे होते हैं कि रिसर्च करके आपको बताएं. और yes, system keeps changing, and yes, people keep gaming the system, and yes, people keep trying to make better use of whatever facilities they have, however they get them. So ये तो humanity का हिस्सा है, and that's why you need monitoring and evaluation all over the place. And that's why I say that the establishment division, in fact, I would argue there should be a ministry of human resource management in the government, not establishment division. And the human resource management ministry should be giving annual reports to Parliament on exactly these issues. Unfortunately, right now, what we've done is we've got the ad hoc pay commission approach, that every 5-10 years we have a pay commission, and that does an ad hoc thing. Then we have ad hoc pay increases every year. Then we got ad hoc perks, and then we got ad hoc appointments. We think an appointment with an interview is enough, and I don't think it is enough, but those are separate subjects. We'll come to them later. Let me go to Dr. Nayab to give her whatever last input she's got, and then I'll go back to the rest of the panel.
I don't think I have much left to say now. We've written all the comments and we'll see what we can accommodate. Most of the data is coming from the AGPR. So it's not as if, and these are payments that were actually made. The allowances that I mentioned, the list that was given, I mean, those heads are functional and payments are being made under those heads. Shabazz Rana said that, are we recommending monetization again? Yes, we are recommending monetization again. I would agree. That's why I had actually in the slide that fully and actually monetize transport. If it failed the first time, it is not necessary that we fail the second time. We have to get it right, because the way we are functioning right now is not the way to go about it, whether it's housing, whether it's transport. My colleague Umar responded to the other part. Public sector is, yes, private sector is being paid more, but not cash. What we are recommending is that increase. That's why I said that happier employees. Most of the dissatisfaction is coming from the fact that the payments are not in cash, and you don't exactly feel the same way about a benefit that you are getting that is not in monetary terms. And Wajid Rana Sahab, you are giving too much credit to me. It's not just my study. We are 4+3 people who were working on this report. And the report would be online by 12:30, within 5-10 minutes, the next 5-10 minutes. Any of you, irrespective of how harsh the comments are, we'll welcome those, and please send them to any of us or me or Dr. Nadeem, anyone. I see one more hand, Aziz, iPhone. We'll take this as the last question.
अस्सलाम वालेकुम जी, मेरा क्वेश्चन ये है कि ये मोनेटाइजेशन तो कोई 96-97 से ये सारी एक्सरसाइज शुरू हुई, मोनेटाइजेशन हो भी गई, मोनेटाइजेशन ऑफ ट्रांसपोर्ट पे ही जस्ट रुके। मोनेटाइजेशन का मतलब ये था कि ये जैसे आपने अभी कहा कि लोगों को जब कोई इनकाइंड कोई चीज मिल रही है तो उसे वो उतना रिकॉग्नाइज नहीं करते, कैश में रिकॉग्नाइज कर लेंगे। My understanding is कि मोनेटाइजेशन भी वसूल की जा रही है। मैं ये कहूँगा अगर कोई 10% भी सीनियर ऑफिसर जो है वो नॉन ऑफिशियल गाड़ी में दफ्तर जाते हैं तो दैट विल बी अ बिग न्यूज फॉर मी। मोनेटाइजेशन भी रिसीव की जा रही है, ऑफिशियल कार भी यूज हो रही हैं। अगर ऑफिशियल कार वो मिनिस्ट्री की या इस तरह की नहीं है, मिनिस्ट्री के किसी सबऑर्डिनेट अदारे की, कारपोरेशन की होगी, तो ये मोनेटाइजेशन इज मे बी कॉन्सेप्ट इज नॉट अ फेल्ड कॉन्सेप्ट, but its implementation in Pakistan is a failed
जी अजीज साहब
exercise.
बिल्कुल अगर आप रिपोर्ट देखेंगे तो उसमें एग्जैक्टली हम यही कह रहे हैं कि अगर इवन जो मैंने अलाउंसेस की आपको लिस्ट दिखाई है उसमें भी बिल्कुल यही है कि मोनेटाइजेशन भी है, ट्रांसपोर्ट भी है, ट्रेवल भी है, गाड़ी भी है, सब कुछ ही है। तो अगर है इसका ये मतलब नहीं कि उसके बारे में कुछ करने की जरूरत नहीं है, मतलब गलत चीज को आपने कभी तो ठीक करना है ना। और ये जो आप बात कह रहे हैं बिल्कुल सही है कि गाड़ी भी है और साथ साथ जो है मोनेटाइजेशन भी है, सैडली ऐसा ही है। कंक्लूड करें
जी, Jamil, Nasir, Nargis, do you want to say any last words? Jamil sir, anything?
May I?
Ji, please go ahead, Nargis. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay, ma'am.
Go ahead, Nargis.
I have a final observation to make. In one of the boxes, you have given the information that the federal government has around 581,000 employees, which is correct. Like the information must have been taken from the establishment division. Well, the establishment division bulletin also says that out of these 581,000 employees, more than 60% are the LEAs. They are the ones who are working under the Ministry of Defense and Ministry of Interior. So, they have entirely different compensation packages, allowances, medical facilities, and they tenure of मेरा कहने का मकसद ये है कि next time whenever a report is being done, even we are trying in the Pay and Pension Commission to get more information and data from the provinces and on this aspect also. So we maybe PIDE can also try. We also face a lot of we have been facing a lot of difficulties in getting data from the provinces because it doesn't make sense कि हम सिर्फ बैठ के जो सारी अपनी research है उसको 2-3 लाख employees के basis पे करें, which is the actual number of employees in the federal government. So I would appreciate अगर PIDE भी करे और Pay and Pension Commission भी try कर रहा है. दूसरा ये कि I have noticed that over the years, and you have mentioned that in your report also, कि जो previous Pay and Pension Commission हैं उनकी भी कोई recommendations की we do not know much about their implementation status as to what happened to their recommendations, whether they were accepted, where were they presented, what happened, where were they approved, not approved, what happened. So what I would say is, and I am endeavoring कि मेरी जब report final जब भी आएगी तो उसमें हम एक way forward and implementation strategy भी जरूर दें ताकि we are going to put that responsibility on the government. Obviously all pay commissions are apolitical bodies and they make their recommendations और बाद में फिर उनके ऊपर blame भी आता है कि कुछ भी नहीं हुआ. Nothing much has happened. मतलब they had meetings and they had deliberations, but nothing much happened and things did not move forward. It is for the government to implement those recommendations. The recommendations could be good, not good, bad, whatever. But we must get to know we must have an idea regarding the implementation. So I would suggest that जो भी next research civil service reforms पे किसी भी aspect की जाए उसमें एक chapter जरूर होना चाहिए on way forward and implementation and how can the government, if the government can do it incrementally in stages gradually, then that should also be suggested. Maybe it is not possible for any government to implement everything in one go. So some strategy should be suggested. Thank you.
Thank you, Ji. Jamil sir.
थैंक यू डॉक्टर साहब, ये रिपोर्ट आप पब्लिक हो जाएगी, इस पे जो भी कमेंट्स आए उनको फिर देखा जाना चाहिए, उनको इनकॉर्पोरेट किया जाए कैसे है। तो जस्ट एक यही है, मैं दोबारा आपको कांग्रेचुलेट करता हूँ कि एक इनिशिएट की है आपने डिबेट और इंशाल्लाह वी विल कीप डिस्कसिंग इट इन फ्यूचर एज वेल। और रिजल्ट ओवरनाइट नहीं आते, चीज़ें जो इसमें से बेहतर छन के निकलेंगी, होपफुली गवर्नमेंट भी तो चीज़ों को इम्प्रूव करने के लिए ही बैठी है और चीज़ें इंशाल्लाह इम्प्रूव होंगी विद द पैसेज ऑफ टाइम। आई कांग्रेचुलेट।
Thank you very much, Ji. Thank you very much. I think, Nargis, you're absolutely right. I think what we need is more transparency from the government, and we need the government to release data. PIFRA, आपने mention किया था. Yes, PIFRA is available, but PIFRA is not available. I mean, for example, PIDE has no access to PIFRA. No university has access to PIFRA. PIFRA को अब मेरा ख्याल 20 साल हो गए हैं और PIFRA किसी को नहीं मिल रहा. डेटा जो पिफ्रा का है वो पता नहीं कहाँ जा रहा है, कितने $1 million खर्च हो चुके हैं, but we get nothing from it. So to us, quite frankly, PIFRA is dead. It does not exist. And secondly, no government department is willing to share data. And in fact, no government department has data. And I guess there used to be a time when there was things like Pakistan education, statistics, planned documents, I remember that time. Today, when you go to a ministry, EAD has no data on foreign aid. Wajidana used to be EAD secretary. Health ka aap dekh lein, Nargis used to be health secretary. Health pe kaun sa data hame milta hai? So quite frankly, the job of federal ministries is to develop data and give data. If the federal ministries are not developing data, then why should the provincial ministries develop data? With the result that the government, which if you go to the India Office Library and you look there, India Office Library is full of data that people are researching even today, because the job of the civil servant was to collect data. Today, the civil service neither collects data nor gives it to anybody. And that's a huge issue. This report, we spent a lot of time and effort collecting what we could. And finally, I said, publish it. Who the hell cares? Because let's open the debate. This nonsense about people telling us, no, we don't have the data, so we can't write, has to stop. We have to begin to open up the debate. And I hope establishment now gives us the data, everybody the data. Let people analyze, let people understand. In a democracy, that's the way it works. And yes, of course, there's lots of things to be talked about and said and done. Nobody's saying civil service or any reform. No reform is easy. All reforms are very difficult. And yes, you fail in reform. Ye nahi hota ki everything succeeds. Obamacare failed. Even the banking reform that US did failed because 2008 happened. Then there's another reform that happens. That's what keeps people like us alive, because we have to keep researching to develop reforms. So yes, we'll keep doing that. And I hope we can engage the wider community, the research community. We're trying to engage the universities to do it. We need a lot more research on Pakistan, a lot more effort to make things work. No fragmented approach will work. The civil service reform that has to happen has to be holistic and very sharp. We have to change direction sharply. This business of giving an MP here, or this there, or that. For example, the judges now have huge salaries and they keep the perks too. I don't mind, they should have a huge salary, but at least give up the perks. So there's a huge amount of issue that we need to talk about, and we will, inshallah. Thank you very much, folks. Thank you for making this very successful. Inshallah, we'll see you again soon. Thank you, Nargis. Thank you for participating. Thank you, Jameel. Khuda Hafiz.